Anne-Marie Schubert, I want to welcome you to Marsy's Law interview series, Why We Do What We Do. Thank you so much for joining us in what has been an incredibly busy week for you, National Crime Victims' Rights Week. The district
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much. And it's a great way to end. Well, you're in West Coast time, so you're not really ending your day or your week. It actually is a Sacramento County DA, your days and weeks really never end. Can you first tell us a little bit about the National Crime Victims' Rights Week, the Outstanding Citizens Award that you've been giving annually, and you were doing it basically throughout today. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe somebody that you guys have recognized.
Sure. So it's actually I'm going to date myself here. It's our 23rd annual Outstanding Citizens Award, and I was actually saying this morning to the group that one of the reasons the primary reason it was started was because back in the mid 90s in Sacramento, we had a very serious child rapist, kidnapper, a serial sex offender. Now you know this, Pete, from your days. It's extremely rare to have those kinds of stranger kidnappings of children. And these were little kids. These were like 4 to 7. And the whole reason the case was solved was because a woman had come home for lunch, saw something that seemed suspicious, yelled at the person. The guy was actually putting these kids into a car, and she got his license plate. And it was really kind of a needle in a haystack of going back by police. And that's what solved it. And she kind of basically came forward, and she solved it. So we started this, that was 1999. We kind of recognized that we can't do this job without people having courage to come forward. Sometimes it's witnesses, a lot of times it's crime victims. And so we've been doing this for a long time. We feel very strongly in this county, and I think we do it all over California, where we acknowledge that it takes extraordinary courage for folks to come forward. And having grown up in this business, there's a human toll of crime. And sometimes people have to testify in some of the worst and most horrific set of circumstances. So one of the people that we gave an award to this morning is a nurse who worked at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. And at the time she was working there, I think she was in nursing school, but she heard a scream. And she thought it was some kind of a medical scream, like she was getting ready to get the defibrillator. And she realized within seconds that it was a scream of her coworker who had been attacked by an addict that was there at the rehab facility. And she went out and she saw this man who was 6 foot something, 260 pounds, attacking this woman, sexually assaulting this woman. And she just ran immediately towards him, jumped on him, body slammed him, put him in a chokehold. And he's probably got 100 pounds on her. And because of that courage, she interrupted and stopped that sexual assault. Now, so that's an example. I mean, she then then she had to come to court, and the victim of the crime testified if it hadn't been for what she did, she would have been raped. I mean, this woman, the guy was ultimately convicted and sentenced to what we call attempted rape here, but sentenced to prison. But that's an example. There was another woman today that we recognized that a stranger basically broke into her home and held people hostage, and she spent about 8 hours with this man, feeding him, trying to calm him. He had a weapon, praying with him, and ultimately her family was there. There were several people in the home, and so she was, she's a grandma, so she uses extraordinary courage to kind of get them through this. So those are some of the things that, sadly, those are things that we see far too often, right?
Yeah, and it is fitting, because one of the reasons why we started this interview series of Why We Do What We Do is we try to talk to the people like yourself who stand up for victims and advocate on behalf of victims and victims' rights all across the country, where we try to recognize the work and also what incentivizes people like you to do the work that you do. I've seen and talked to you and seen so many interviews with you where you talked about, and you just mentioned it again, the human toll of crime. And one thing you said at one point was, you said, if we cannot recognize the human toll of crime, then we are failing. Now,
that's right.
You've been recognized by your own peers as prosecutors as the prosecutor of the year at one point. You've also been recognized as the instructor of the year. we're going to try to do as best we can to go over 31 years of law enforcement and prosecutorial
Yeah.
experience in under 30 minutes.
All right.
Quite a challenge. You are Sacramento County prosecutor for the longest time, elected district attorney of Sacramento County now. And you have spent your career prosecuting some of the most notorious murderers, rapists, and child molesters in California. You also, in 2002, formed the Cold Case Protection Unit and served as its very first prosecutor. And you've been nationally recognized for your knowledge of forensic DNA, and you actually help prosecutors throughout the country in solving cases with DNA evidence and what's called the IgG, or investigative genetic genealogy. And one of the things that I noticed about your career and all of the high profile cases and some of the cases that people outside of Sacramento County probably have never heard of, is that your pursuit is really a pursuit of justice. You follow the facts, you follow the evidence wherever it leads. And the cornerstone of public safety that you refer to is prosecution, prevention, and innovation. A few of the cases I want to talk about, the Golden State Killer case, what is known as the Second Story Rapist case. And then there was an incredible case of unemployment fraud where billions of dollars were stolen from the Employment Development Department in California that you investigated and prosecuted. And then ultimately, I want to talk about, along the lines of the pursuit of justice wherever it leads, the exoneration of a man named Ricky Davis out of El Dorado County, I believe it was.
Correct.
So let's just talk a little bit about the Golden State Killer case first. Could you tell us a little bit about that case and how you investigated that case?
So my own little personal story is I grew up in Sacramento, and I lived in the neighborhoods not far from where he was assaulting. And he was in the Northern California area. He was called the East Area Rapist. He later was dubbed the Golden State Killer. But essentially what he did, his name is Joseph D'Angelo. Beginning in the mid 70s, he sexually assaulted upwards of 50 women throughout Northern California. Oftentimes he went into homes where there were men as well. He would tie the man up. He would use kind of makeshift alarms, like he would tie him with shoelaces. Then he would put teacups on their back, and that was mainly so he could hear him. He would spend hours, often at times, in the home, eating their food, drinking, whatever it was, all in between committing these horrific sexual assaults. And then from there, he went to, we had a double homicide in Sacramento of a young couple. Ultimately, through DNA and this incredible tool, which I can talk about, he was identified, and he was prosecuted for 13 murders and a multitude of kidnappings for purposes of what we call robbery, because the statute of limitations had run on the rapes. But he ultimately pled to all of those. He admitted all these crimes. He is without a doubt, perhaps until his arrest, the most prolific serial killer that had yet to be apprehended. So for me, it was both personal and professional. When we started the cold case unit in 2000, whatever it was, 2002, that was one of the ones I asked my office, can we try to solve this? At that time, I only thought it was rape series. And then ultimately, through working with another investigator, I'm not an investigator, I'm a DA, but worked on it for many years. Our office worked on it. We obviously put together task forces with folks around the state, given the magnitude. And then in the fall of 2017, a criminalist investigator named Paul Holes came to me and said, "Hey, I have this kind of idea about using genealogy." And my first DNA case was in 1994, I think. I realized then it was a stranger kidnapping of a teenage girl. I realized then that DNA is the greatest tool ever given to law enforcement to find the truth, no matter where it leads us. So when this idea was presented, because I understand DNA, I knew where we had gotten from various things, and of course, obviously supported its use in this particular case, and it obviously worked. And if we didn't have that tool, it would never have been solved. There's no doubt in my mind, it was the only way that we were able to identify him. A lot of folks thought we never would catch him. It's an amazing tool. And then ultimately it became, once he was identified and arrested, it became the largest prosecution, I'm quite sure, in California history. We had many DAs that joined together. It was prosecuted here in Sacramento. He ultimately pled guilty. And I want to go back for a second about the human toll. When D'Angelo, he pled guilty, and then we set a week-long hearing for all the victims to come in. Now, there was probably upwards of, 75 people that came in and told the judge the impact it had on their lives and their families. I've sat in courtrooms for a long time. I've sat with families, and anybody that grows up in this industry understands the human toll. But I was just, these are crimes that happened 40 years ago. And there are things about what they said to the judge that I will never forget. For instance, one of the women that was raped, her first name is Gay, and she was a young married woman. Her husband's a lawyer. They had gone out that night for a movie or something, came home. D'Angelo was there. He was in the house for several hours committing these terrible crimes.
And D'Angelo is the defendant.
D'Angelo is the Golden State Killer, yes. So she got up and told the judge, among many other things, but she said, I chose to become a teacher because at least I wasn't afraid of children. And that stuck with me. It has, and it always will. There was another woman that was a rape victim that said that she was an avid water skier. And it was something that she was very passionate about. And she never water skied again because he said to her, "I saw you at the lake that day." I mean, so those are the things that I think for us that work in this industry, it changes people's lives. It changes how they raise their children. It changes the professions they choose. It may change how they look at somebody in the grocery store line. So that was, clearly it's a pinnacle of my career that we are able to ultimately identify him and prosecute him, and hopefully he dies in prison, which he should. It's a bunch of life without paroles. But it was an extraordinary case and extraordinary work done by law enforcement to bring this case to justice ultimately.
And he has multiple life sentences on and after each other, correct?
Yes, I think he got a sentence of 13 life without paroles, and he's in his 70s, mid 70s. He tried in many ways to fake it through the court proceedings, and act like he was either, the word malingering in our world, he was faking it. And we ultimately decided to release some of his jail tapes to show just how much he wasn't faking it. He was faking it and how much he's quite capable. And his personality is not very different, even though it's been 40 years. So it was the window into his mind, I guess you can say.
Yeah. And another notorious California case of the, which has now been dubbed the Second Story Rapist case. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the prosecution of that case?
So I was in the rape unit in Sacramento in the mid 90s. So I came to Sacramento DA's office in 1996. I think I got assigned to that unit in probably 98 or so. And I was doing DNA cases. The DNA was kind of new at that time, but I also knew the power of the tool. And so I got a call from a detective, longtime detective, very good detective, saying, "Hey, I got this case. It's a very serious stranger rape. The statute of limitations is going to run. Can we do anything?" And I had just coincidentally read an article in the paper about a prosecutor in Wisconsin, a guy named Norm Gahn, who had this idea, like, maybe we can charge somebody using their DNA as their identifier when you don't know who it is. And the idea was, can you satisfy the statute of limitations? And I just coincidentally read this article. I'm like, God, I wonder if we could do that in Sacramento. So I did a lot of research, worked with one of my colleagues here, talked to other people. I remember some people saying, "No way, you can't do it." I'm like, well, I think the law supports it and we're going to do it. So we did the DNA, and about 2 days or so before the statute would have run. So what we knew is he was a serial rapist. Okay. We didn't know who he was, but we had a DNA profile. So we charged People versus John Doe, and we alleged his DNA profile as his description. And ironic, and we did a couple of them, a couple of these serial rape cases just to make sure we preserve the statute. So ironically, on the Second Story Rapist case, probably about 2 weeks after the statute would have run, we identified him through a DNA match. His name is Paul Robinson. I prosecuted him. I did the trial. The case actually went all the way to the California Supreme Court on the legality of doing this. It was a pretty stressful time for me because I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. but ultimately the trial court ruled in our favor. Actually, ironically, the trial court judge is now our chief justice. But anyway, it went to the Cal Supreme Court, and then it was upheld. And now I believe it. I'd like to believe it's the model. It was the first conviction, I believe, in the country using this tool. But when it went to trial, I don't know. There was probably 6 victims that we were able to ultimately, maybe more. He's still in prison, although he keeps still trying to get out. But that was just a great example of trying to be innovative in using the legal tools we have and the DNA that we had to also identify him.
Yeah, and one of the things that that comes through when you're recounting these cases, and anybody that knows your career as a prosecutor, is you really live these cases, and it's tough not to if you're in this business.
Yeah,
it does become consuming, and but it is so important that we've both seen in our career for a victim to know that they have that support, that you're literally and figuratively standing beside them through the process, because so many victims, it's for the most part a foreign world, and it's a tough world to navigate, the criminal justice system, in the courtroom, in the hearings, and by all accounts you always are by their side and you always keep them in the loop. And it just seems as though these days, when people are talking about criminal justice reform all across the country, it gets defined through whoever happens to be in power, it seems, and
or has the most money, just to define the narrative.
And the way,
sadly,
that the model that you set as the Sacramento County District Attorney is really a model that is so victim oriented and justice oriented, especially when it's compared with what's going on in other parts of California. You know, when you see that there are district attorneys, elected district attorneys, who are not allowing their own prosecutors to appear at parole hearings. I mean, I know we had a woman named Jessica Corday on this interview.
I know her well. She's a wonderful woman.
And she speaks just as highly of you. And it's because of your professionalism. And it's because of the fact, as you know, and as anyone who watched Jessica's interview, she does not mince words.
No, and she doesn't.
She knows who's in her corner and who's in her family's corner. And she knows who isn't. And she speaks so highly of you. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw Jessica Corday go through, and what your take is on all of that?
When I first heard of Jessica, it was really the pain of a mother who was abandoned by her prosecutor. Let's be honest, the DA in LA, what he claims is that the role of the prosecutor ends at sentencing, which is, without being political, it's just ludicrous, because then why do you write letters of support to let people out of prison then? So, but the role of the prosecutor doesn't end. The role of the prosecutor should go all the way through those parole hearings, or whenever that we need to step in. Sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes we should concede that somebody's ready for parole. I mean, it's possible, but we should also be willing to speak for the victims. And we should also be willing to speak if the person is still too dangerous to release. So when I first met Jessica, I think she had her mask on that says "Fight Like a Mom," and that's what she does. And what pained me the most was to listen to her that she had to read her child's autopsy report, and that's it's disgraceful, honestly. And these shenanigans that are going on to try to prevent victims from appearing at parole hearings, now that you've got retired prosecutors that are stepping up, trying to help in these. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is upside down. But that I'm just so I'm honored to know her, because she will always fight like a mom, and she's going to do what she needs to do to stand when someone else is not standing next to her, because the elected DA has barred them from doing that.
Another push right now that really has had a huge impact on the rise in crime is the whole concept of zero cash bail.
Correct.
In fact, in Sacramento County, I know Sacramento County, you had some incredible statistics with people who were released on zero cash bail, sums of 5,000 or so, and about 4,400 of them were rearrested.
Right. We did. So, I mean, little background. I mean, this happened in most counties across the country was, COVID hits, the jail populations want to reduce their numbers because they don't want an outbreak of COVID. So there was a judicial order adopting zero bail. But it only lasted for about a month, and then it went back to the locals to decide how to do it. And many counties kept the zero bail. So now we've got California. We have a Supreme Court decision that basically and rightfully says we cannot base bail on somebody's ability to pay. You can't, but you can retain constitutional authority. The judges have retained that authority when somebody is a danger or a flight risk. So we've been fighting we finally got back, basically our regular bail schedule, but we had a lot of catch and release going on. Sorry, but the challenges with zero bail were no oversight, no check-ins, probably a whole lot of failure to appears. A lot of people out there with, we've got astronomical number of illegal guns in communities across this country. So there was just a lot of challenges that we're facing. California, there's been some legislative efforts to get rid of the bail system completely. That there was a ballot initiative that said, no, we want a bail system. Some legislators are still trying to get rid of it. But as of right now, we still have a bail system. I mean, in my opinion, we need a bail system. You've got to, yeah, we have constitutional case law on it. But when you look across this country in some jurisdictions, the getting rid of bail has been extremely dangerous. The astronomical number of people committing violent crime while out on bond is really alarming.
Yeah, and we are starting to see, not just in California, but there it happens to be an erosion of victims' rights that seems to go hand in hand sometimes with some people's, like you said, some people's narrative of what criminal justice reform actually is. And, part of that is why Marsy's law started in the first place, was to try to enshrine constitutional rights of victims actually in state constitutions, so that victims' rights, as important as they are not subject to the whim of any particular legislator. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on specifically in California when it comes to those parole hearings, and whether or not there's some legislation, I think, that you were talking about that's trying to move through right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to speak as a prosecutor here. I think for many years we're seeing the erosion of victims' rights. I mean, and I'll give you an example of this is not a parole hearing issue, but it is a sentencing issue. So, for instance, in California, we still have capital punishment. We have a moratorium, but it's still on the books. We also have a sentence of life without parole. And when when you prosecute a horrific murderer for a horrific crime and they get sentenced to never get out of prison, that's something that we should be able to, the victim should rely on. They don't ever have to worry about it again, right? So we had a case from one of our cold cases where a guy kidnapped, rapes, and murders a pregnant woman back in 1979. And then he was ultimately caught with DNA, prosecuted, and he was sentenced to never get out of prison. And so that family had some assurance, right? Well, last year in our legislature, they thought it was smart to introduce a bill that said, well, if they're on death row or they're serving life without parole, we're going to let them petition after 20 years to get out. And that's just grotesque to me. I mean, we had to bring victims in. They imagine what it's like to re-traumatize them like that. The bill died, but I think the concern is that somebody thought this was a good idea and it probably will be back. There's been efforts to reduce victims' rights at parole hearings. I think there's a movement to make it all by Zoom. Maybe that's efficient. Maybe it's more cost effective. But shouldn't that be also a right of the victim to be present at a parole hearing in person? Because we know, Zoom is fine, but it's nowhere near as effective as being in person. So that's something that's concerning. I don't know where it's at, that piece of legislation's at, but it's also just a concern. Another concern. We've got lawsuits going on in California here against our prison system because they are really changing sentencing laws by a regulatory process. That again is also another way that you're eroding crime victims' rights as well. So lots going on here, sadly.
Yeah, well, one thing that people, if anybody that knows you and knows your office, I wanted to just highlight a few things that when you talk about innovation, you don't just take victims' rights and try to do them like any other person would do. You take it to a whole new level. I look at the homicide support network that you have in your office that meets the first Wednesday of every month. As a former homicide prosecutor, I look back at the days when I was a homicide prosecutor in Boston. I wish that we had done that in our office. I ended up probably doing some of them impromptu anyways. But the fact that your office provides that, and I looked at some of the homicide support network newsletters that go out every single month from your office, and they have contacts for the people, the victim witness advocates in your office, and phone numbers and inspirational quotes and birth dates, and dates that and dates that people were killed. And one of the other things that I saw was the memory quilts.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, we show it every year at the Outstanding Citizen Award. It's quilts that have been put together with the faces of victims of homicide, and I think it's got the date of their death. Because I think it's important that people remember, and it's, behind all of these statistics of homicides, there's human beings. So, the support network is a really important thing for folks to come together, because sadly, they need others that can understand the grief that they're suffering from. So yeah, I just think it's an opportunity for us to, to make sure we always remember who these folks are.
Yeah, well, I will say, and you've been so generous with your time, and I know how busy you are, and I wanted to make sure that we kept your 31 years of prosecutorial experience to 30 minutes or under. So I just wanted to thank you, and I just wanted to tell you that whether it's Jessica Corday, who told me personally how much admiration and respect she has for you,
sweet.
and some of the other stories that you told us today about some of the stories from the victims, it's clear that you know the victims, and you actually do recognize the human toll of crime, and that's what drives you. And that is you're the kind of person that Marsy's Law wants to always celebrate, and for all the work that you do for victims and victims' rights. And I just wanted to just note, there was an interview that I saw with you, and somebody asked you, which I thought was a very good question, and they asked you about the human toll that this job takes on you. And your answer was, even though there's a lot of sadness and ugliness in this profession, I always realize that there's beauty in this world. And you talked about the fact that you're an outdoors person and you like to kayak and you love Yellowstone. You don't get to go there as much as you'd love to. You talked about the beauty in the world. And I thought about the fact that because of you and your work, you've helped people, victims and survivors like Jessica Corday, who've been through the most gut-wrenching sadness in the world. And your support, you've enabled them to actually see beauty in the world. And I know that firsthand from talking to someone like Jessica.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So thank you for all the work that you do and continue to do for the people of California at a really tough time. And we're always here to help you too.
All right. Thanks so much, Pete. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Anne-Marie. Have a great weekend.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.